everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
MarvelGodzilla starting as a level 2 mutant, chapter 124 to 134, 124 new fanfic, Arcane. Welcome to Zon. This sudden change almost instantly altered the situation on the battlefield. At that moment, every sentinel robot stopped moving in perfect unison. Countless pairs of machine eyes glowing scarlet locked onto the dozens of mutant presences that had appeared in the air without warning. A few minutes earlier, the X-Men had only just ended the battle in Sokovia, and had not even had time to rest when Fenris appeared in front of them, holding a communicator that kept emitting piercing static. The Brotherhood is in trouble. That short sentence landed like thunder from a clear sky, making everyone's expressions turn grim at once. They had not even had time to celebrate their overwhelming victory against the 19th generation Sentinels, and they had no mood left to rest. Without the slightest hesitation, they arrived on this battlefield. Yet even though they had already braced themselves mentally, the of this once idyllic haven still exceeded everyone's expectations. The entire land looked as if it had been thoroughly plowed over. Even from high in the air, they could smell the sharp, metallic stench permeating the air. Our people. Kitty Pryde's gaze swept across the ground below. The devastation filled her eyes, and tears immediately fell in large drops. Don't cry. Pyro took a deep breath. Flames roared up around him. He tightly gripped the hilt of the blade in his hand, his eyes quietly turning red. Pyro, don't be reckless. Seeing that Pyro was about to leave the group, Iceman grabbed his wrist. These sentinels are more than 3 times taller than the robots we just dealt with. Don't try to play hero alone. Playing hero is still better than being a coward. Pyro flung off Iceman's hand. The next moment, flames propelled his body downward without hesitation as he dove toward the ground. Riptide, look at me. At this point, Riptide's stamina was nearly exhausted. The wind around him was growing weaker and weaker. Dozens of sentinels had him surrounded, and he was on the verge of collapsing. A clear male voice suddenly came from the distant sky. When a streak of fire tore across the heavens, Riptide lifted his head, and happened to see a young man wrapped in flames flying toward him. Decades of experience allowed Riptide to understand the other party's intention instantly. The hurricane that had already been at the end of its strength suddenly expanded. Almost at the same time, the flames around Pyro ignited the violent wind. Wind fed fire. In an instant, a fire tornado linking heaven and earth took shape. Scorching heat erupted with the immense air pressure, producing a loud, explosive roar. The surrounding sentinels were swept into it in an instant, and for a moment, one corner of the battlefield was suddenly cleared. They're just a little taller. Is there any difference to us between 3 meters and 10? Don't be afraid. Kill them. The appearance of the fire tornado ignited the fury in everyone's hearts. The next moment, the X-Men filed out of the portal one after another and plunged down from the sky. With high-end combat power joining the battle, in less than half a minute from their appearance to their engagement, the situation that had been almost a one-sided slaughter shifted into a stalemate. Although they still could not fully counterattack in the short term, at least they had gained a foothold. The Brotherhood members on the ground seemed to have found their backbone. The gloom and despair in their eyes were almost swept away. One after another, they picked up the weapons on the ground already covered in dust and began resisting. Magneto, save us. On the other side, around the shelter, the killing machines were about to pour into the shelter like a tide. The moment countless people met their scarlet eyes, they let out shrill, desperate screams. ZZT, ZZT. The sound of faceplates opening and closing came from the sentinels' faces. Deep within their heads, dazzling red light slowly lit up. Laser blasts containing lethal force were ready to fire. In the next second, they looked as if they would spray out and turn the alloy shelter into a complete inferno. Just when everyone had already widened their eyes in despair, preparing to face the death rays, the floor beneath their feet suddenly began shaking without warning. A low hum sounded from every direction. In an instant, the magnetic field that had originally enveloped the shelter quietly began to change. An irresistible force suddenly erupted. Before that powerful magnetism, the shelter that had been buried deep underground was easily shaken loose and began rocking constantly. Invisible waves spread outward. At the same time, the sentinels that had surrounded the shelter so tightly that not even water could pass were all struck as if by a heavy blow and flung violently away. Before anyone could see clearly, an old but pine-straight man had quietly appeared above the shelter. "Magneto is here. We're saved." Seeing the murderous sentinels prove so helpless before this old man, Magneto's appearance almost instantly reignited everyone's hope of survival. Even though they could only see a vague silhouette, his presence still easily set the crowd, which had already fallen into deathly silence, ablaze. "Don't be afraid." Dense masses of sentinels were still surging in from the distance. They flew through the air and spread across the ground. Although this wave had been pushed back, even more were still streaming in to fill the gaps ahead. Even Magneto could not help feeling his scalp prickle at such a terrifying number. Even so, his voice remained steady. That calm voice, filled with powerful confidence, easily soothed the fear in everyone's hearts. The shelter instantly fell silent, and countless gazes looked firmly into the air. As if so long as Magneto was there, they would never fear any storm. Their leader was no longer young, but he would always be that all-powerful strongman. "Everyone, stand firm." With a soft shout, Magneto took a deep breath, stretched out his right hand, and grasped toward the ground through empty air. A deep, powerful growl rang out. The next moment, the steel shelter, several meters thick and covering nearly 10,000 square meters, suddenly shook. The rioting magnetic field instantly released hundreds of thousands of tons of force. Under that power, the steel fortress buried dozens of meters underground actually began floating upward bit by bit. A thunderous roar rang out. Countless clumps of soil wrestled down from the shelter's outer shell. Magneto's body gradually rose into the air. Beneath his feet, the heavy shelter left the ground bit by bit, as if it had completely ignored gravity itself. It hovered high in midair, casting a vast black shadow across the earth below. What sort of sight was it when a steel fortress of nearly 10,000 square meters appeared in the sky? At this moment, Magneto had become the absolute focal point of the entire battlefield. The gazes of all mutants and sentinel robots alike were drawn uncontrollably into the air, toward the man standing in the sky with a giant city held in his hand. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 125, 1251484 for words. Inside the Antarctic base, the enormous room where Bolivar was located suddenly rang with a tremendous impact. On the massive screen supported by mechanical arms, the scene on the Brotherhood's island was clearly displayed before his eyes. Mutants. Very good, Magneto. Bolivar's gaze was dark. His words, filled with killing intent, were squeezed out from between his teeth one by one, and the fury in his chest seemed ready to spill straight through the screen. "All sentinels, kill them. I refuse to believe these mutants don't know what exhaustion is. Wear them down if you have to." A nearly hysterical roar echoed through the room. Beside Bolivar, the 20-meter-tall giant was now nearly complete. The scarlet light in its mechanical eyes flickered non-stop along with the eruption of his rage. At the same time, on the Brotherhood's battlefield, Magneto carried the steel fortress and sped through the sky, its enormous shadow sweeping across the ground below. Soon, he had already arrived at the core of the island. Amid a slightly piercing creak of metal, the shelter was gently set down on a high ground that was easy to defend and hard to attack. "All warriors, bring the civilians and regroup with me. Do not scatter." Rolling waves of sound spread in every direction with Magneto at their center. "Anyone who can fight, step forward and protect the shelter." Magneto floated into the air again without so much as flushing or panting, as if everything he had just done had not cost him anything at all. Under the command of his will, the heavy shelter began changing shape at will, and it soon sealed itself completely. Once his words fell, Magneto shot back into the sky and flew toward the location where Mystique and the others were. That was the second largest gathering point for civilians. Charles, if you still can't find Bolivar's lair, tragedies like this will keep happening again and again. In the air, Magneto withdrew his sorrowful gaze from the land below. Several days earlier, Charles had already taken the informant and hidden inside a sealed room. For who knew how long, he had gone without sleep or rest, trying to crack the secret of the headquarters. But Trask's cunning had surpassed everyone's imagination. That hidden coordinate was not stored ready-made inside the informant's mind, waiting to be learned with a simple read. Instead, it had been encrypted countless times, and could only be deciphered with the aid of specialized instruments. This time it's the Brotherhood. Next time, where will it be? Magneto felt his heart tighten in painful spasms. Time is life. Hurry, Charles. Otherwise, mutants really will be finished. There were simply too many Sentinel robots. And as the transport aircraft outside the island arrived one after another, their numbers were still climbing. They possessed formidable individual strength, and they had also mastered the refined tactical coordination of group combat. Under the control of a hive mind, their power had been pushed to an extremely terrifying level. Human strength would eventually run dry. As time passed, the scales of victory would inevitably tip toward these tireless monsters. We must gather everyone together. That's the only way we'll have even the slightest chance. Almost immediately, Magneto grasped the only possible path to victory for the mutant side. Thoughts kept racing through his mind, but his speed did not slow in the slightest. Under constant acceleration, he nearly turned into an afterimage streaking through the sky. The battles erupting across every corner of the island were confirming his guess step by step. The X-Men had already fought a battle in Sokovia not long ago, and with the Brotherhood members long since exhausted, as time passed second by second, the mutant side had once again begun falling into decline. A deafening, colossal roar suddenly came from the far distance without warning, even more shocking than Magneto's magnetic field transmission. The entire land seemed to suffer a violent earthquake. Invisible shock waves spread from the distance, even beginning to ripple out across the sea. Even the transport aircraft in the air, unaffected by the magnetic field, lurched wildly under the impact of that instant and took a long while to adjust their flight posture again. That is an earthquake. Magneto narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance, but he could only see a tiny point of light standing silently high in the sky. The area on the ground beneath it was precisely where Mystique and the others were surrounded. Endless Sentinel robots surged in from the beach and the sky, rushing toward them. Why does this look so familiar? Fenris was standing high in the air. The wings of light behind him gently beat, and shimmering rainbow light radiated from his body. A powerful aura spread outward, continuously drawing more and more Sentinels' attention. He looked around. Dark clouds filled the surroundings. In the distance, Storm's figure was wrapped within thunderclouds. Several Sentinels lunged at her viciously, only to be shot down one by one. The dark ground beneath his feet was pitted and uneven. Around the churned-up earth was a deep ravine left behind by the battle axe that had just smashed down and split the ground open. Farther away, Scott's optic blasts tore across the sky from time to time. In the woods, Iceman's figure appeared and disappeared amid the frost. Countless flames and hurricanes mixed together, forming fire tornadoes that connected sky and earth. Scene after scene flashed before Fenris's eyes. They carried a strange yet familiar sense of déjà vu, constantly battering his mind. It was from that time. As if lightning had flashed through his mind, Fenris was suddenly startled. He quietly recalled that when he first came into contact with the Time Stone at Camartage, Mothra's power had been stimulated by the Infinity Stone, and had briefly allowed him to see certain images. There had been Tony, pondering how to target him. There had been Peter, trapped between his studies and his identity as Spider-Man, unsure how to handle himself. There had also been Banner, who had already been on the run for several years. And at the end, there had been an unfamiliar battlefield. So what I saw before was actually this moment. That strange familiarity became a clear, icy chill pouring down from the top of his head, making Fenris's entire body shudder uncontrollably. After he understood everything, his abdomen suddenly lit up with dazzling rainbow light without warning. Before Fenris himself could react, the rainbow light had quietly condensed and finally gathered into the shape of an egg. This is... I can lay eggs too. A trace of confusion flashed through Fenris's mind, but looking at the dense mass of sentinels around him, he ultimately did not stop to think about it. The rainbow light gradually faded. In the next moment, his gaze was fixed completely on the battle axe on the ground, its axe blade glowing with a faint blue light. In the future he had once glimpsed, he had only seen a blurry, axe-shaped shadow of light, and noticed that the color flashing across the axe blade was the color of atomic breath. Now, with all the fog cleared away, he finally understood what he had truly seen. The future has arrived. I'll deal with all of you first. His gaze swept over the sentinel robots swarming toward him from every direction. A powerful call suddenly came from the Titan Codex deep within his consciousness. In the next instant, the Codex suddenly began flipping on its own despite the absence of wind. After turning past Godzilla, whose body radiated black-purple light, and was already completely different from his initial form, then passing Mothra, whose wings had grown even heavier and harder, a vast sea suddenly appeared before Fenris's eyes. Above the ocean, a lush green island floated silently on the sea. So the next Titan lives on this island. Fenris's gaze suddenly froze for an instant. The shape of the isolated island looked extremely strange. Viewed from above, at first glance, it actually somewhat resembled the head of a primate. Just as Fenris thought his vision would continue drawing closer, and that he was about to see Kong, the weather over the giant island suddenly began to shift. The life aura that had once covered it had quietly begun to dissipate at some unknown time, and its original lush greenery gradually faded away. A world-shaking boom suddenly came from the island that had once floated alone beyond the sea. In the next instant, the island seemed to come alive. At the position of its eye sockets, a pair of deep, shadowed eyes quietly opened. Kong doesn't live on this island. This island is Kong. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 126, 1261315 Words over the sea. Dark clouds hung low amid flashes of lightning and rolling thunder. The deep seawater had turned a fearsome black, with only the occasional white wave surging up to adorn its surface. The greatest sound was silence. When Fenris's consciousness passed through the Codex and locked eyes with that terrifying giant beast for one brief instant, a massive body that nearly blotted out the entire sea slowly stood up from beneath the water, accompanied by a thunderous roar of the earth splitting apart. Limitless seawater surged wildly in every direction with it at the center, forming colossal waves hundreds of meters high in the blink of an eye. A tsunami swept across the entire sea. Within the gloom of falling seawater, a terrifying black shadow flickered in and out of sight. An ocean abyss thousands of meters deep only barely submerged its calves. When it straightened, its towering body pierced straight through the heavy clouds. Amid booming thunder, violent lightning cut through the cloud layer, yet it could only scatter faint, almost imperceptible sparks across the surface of its body. A silver-white giant axe was planted upside down in the sea, with only its thick, long handle left above the water, standing like a pillar that pinned the ocean in place. It endured the waves' erosion without moving, rising straight into the sky. As the giant axe was effortlessly lifted by the black shadow, it carried a suffocating wind pressure with it. The clouds covering the four directions were torn apart by the gale in an instant, turning into vapor that filled the sky. In that moment, the sky cleared and the clouds scattered. Brilliant sunlight poured down freely. The Black Sea immediately turned into a beautiful azure blue. With only a slight movement, the apocalyptic weather had been changed at will. When Fenris lifted his gaze, he finally saw the other party's full form clearly for the first time. It was a Kong that truly stood between heaven and earth. Unlike an ordinary Kong, its eyes were deep, and its face was majestic and extraordinary. Its tall, powerful body only had to stand there, and it naturally revealed the proud, disdainful bearing of a king. As if sensing Fenris's gaze, it held the giant axe in one hand, casually rested it on its shoulder, and slowly lowered its eyes. Their gazes collided once more. In the next instant, Fenris felt his consciousness blur, and every image before his eyes dissolved like bubbles. Above the Brotherhood's island, the familiar scene appeared before him again. Although he did not know how much time had passed just now, in reality, it seemed as if only an instant had gone by. But no one knew what exaggerated changes had occurred inside Fenris's body in that brief moment. Scott and the others are about to hit their limit. The moment his consciousness returned, Fenris's gaze swept rapidly across his surroundings. His sight and hearing were pushed to their maximum in that instant. His powerful perception spread out, and very soon, the state of the entire battlefield was clear in his mind. On the ground, aside from Pyro, who was fighting alongside Riptide as they supported each other, Cyclops, Beast, Storm, Colossus, Iceman, and the others were already exhausted. Continuous combat had begun, forcing them to overdraw their strength. Even though the vibranium battle suits and adamantium long blades allowed them to easily pierce the monster's tough outer shells, the unavoidable gap in size meant the blade's dimensions limited the damage they could inflict unless they struck key points such as the joints. The Sentinels' abilities emerged endlessly. Frost and Flame shifted back and forth without pause. Their steel bodies could transform into diamond form at any moment, and their bizarre claws were even harder to guard against. With healing factors supporting them, these monsters' group combat ability was more than 10 times stronger than the 19th generation Sentinels they had just encountered in Sokovia. Not much time had passed since the X-Men appeared and entered the battle, but the intensity of combat had risen almost exponentially. By now, everyone's sword hands had begun trembling non-stop. Although all of them possessed extraordinary physiques, it had already become difficult for them to make precise counterattacks under this airtight siege. And because the Sentinels in the aerial battlefield were even denser, even Storm had slowly descended from the sky, afraid of becoming a living target for a sudden ambush. Then I'll go all in. After withdrawing his gaze, Fenris gave a low shout. 2 pairs of dazzling wings of light spread open behind him, carrying him in a high-speed streak through the air. Take the king first. As the powerful aura on his body, far surpassing that of any other mutant, spread without the slightest concealment, Fenris was soon designated the primary attack target by more and more Sentinels. Under the hive mind, large numbers of robots abandoned their original targets without hesitation and turned to pursue Fenris instead. As more and more Sentinels rose into the air, they formed ranks in orderly fashion according to their preset programs. In an instant, the entire sky was covered by dense black clouds. A shadow so thick it seemed impossible to disperse fell downward, almost blotting out all sunlight. Across the battlefields on the ground, almost everyone sensed the pressure they faced suddenly drop, and they all let out a breath of relief at the same time. Who is that? Very soon, someone looked up and noticed the anomaly. Brotherhood warriors began asking one after another. Brilliant, dazzling rainbow light streaked through the air, leaving a gorgeous trail behind. Countless Sentinels followed tightly behind a young man. Overwhelming attacks rained down on him without pause like falling droplets, but with each beat of his wings of light, he dodged them all. In such high-speed movement and offense and defense, the slightest mistake would cause the young man's tiny body to be swallowed up completely in an instant. Even as spectators, many people could not help holding their breath at the danger of it all, silently praying in their hearts. Every successful dodge drew a faint exclamation. In just a few short minutes, that person had almost single-handedly turned the situation of the entire battlefield around again. His name is Fenris. He's a teacher for the X-Men. He's the strongest mutant alive right now. Is Fenris even stronger than Magneto and Professor X? He dares to face this many Sentinel robots alone. Fair point. Amid the rustling discussions, countless admiring and astonished gazes turned toward the sky. Countless hearts began to stir with that streak of rainbow light. Fenris, are you insane? Can you handle this many Sentinels by yourself? In the distance, Magneto looked at Fenris, who was flying wildly through the air to draw fire, his eyes filled with worry and shock. Magnetic fluctuations clearly transmitted his voice into Fenris's ears. Don't try to force yourself. Staying alive matters most. A confident voice returned firmly. While dealing with the endless attacks coming from behind him, Fenris still had enough to observe the situation below and give Magneto instructions. Go gather the others who were forced to scatter. Keep as many of them alive as possible. Magneto looked at Fenris with hesitation written across his face. At this moment, there were at least several thousand Sentinel robots following behind him. These big things are far stronger than the 19th generation Sentinels. Even if you turn into that giant lizard, you'll only be about as tall as them. Be careful. After giving one final warning, Magneto abruptly turned and shot away at high speed. At this point, he could only choose to believe in Fenris. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 127, 127. 1438 words. I said I can do it, so I can do it. The Sentinel's advantage was not in flight. As long as Fenris accelerated even slightly, he could easily leave them far behind. He deliberately maintained a distance that was neither too close nor too far. Once he saw that the group behind him had grown large enough, the two pairs of light wings on his back beat once, and his entire body instantly became an afterimage flying toward the outside of the island. Fenris is flying toward us. As the island's second largest defensive line, Mystique's side had gathered a large number of X-Men and the Brotherhood's main members. Because of that, after Fenris had single-handedly taken on the pressure from the entire aerial battlefield and nearly 70% of the ground battlefield, this side was also the first to stabilize. Within the crowd, Mystique noticed Fenris's movement almost immediately. Fenris, come on. Watching Fenris dart and weave through the air alone, restraining countless Sentinels by himself, even Azazel could not help breaking into a cold sweat for him. Is Fenris reaching his limit? However, when they noticed that Fenris's speed was slowing bit by bit, Mystique and Emma Frost both frowned in worry. The two exchanged a glance and saw the same anxiety in each other's eyes. Fenris, if you can't hold on, run. Don't worry about us. Come back and avenge us later. As one of the strongest mutant combatants alive, as long as Fenris lived, there would always be a trace of hope. If Fenris fell here trying to save people like them, who had no power to resist the Sentinels, Mystique simply did not dare imagine what kind of desperate future mutants would face after losing such a powerful figure. Fenris can't die. Mutants need him. As the leader of the X-Men, the instant Scott realized Fenris might be running out of strength, he made a decision without hesitation while struggling to lead everyone in maintaining the defensive line. All X-Men, abandon the line. Save Fenris with everything you have. Prepare to sacrifice yourselves. Prepare to sacrifice ourselves. Although Cyclops hesitated slightly, his calm tone made it sound as if he were discussing what they should eat that afternoon. You all. Mystique looked at those young faces with a complicated expression. For some reason, her eyes suddenly stung. Without any hesitation, every X-Man, including Beast, Storm, Colossus, and the others, responded almost in unison. Watching the streak of rainbow light Fenris had become draw closer and closer, everyone's face was filled with calm. Professor Ororo, send me up. Colossus was the first to step forward, his eyes fixed firmly on the dense mass of Sentinels in the air. His defensive ability was the strongest among them all. But even now, wearing a vibranium battle suit, and with his whole body transformed into steel, once he was thrown into that swarm of Sentinels like locusts, he still could not escape the inevitable end of being torn apart. There's nothing to hesitate about. Colossus smiled, his eyes full of reluctance as they swept over everyone's faces. I'm glad I got to fight beside all of you. There was unwillingness in his tone, but not the slightest fear. Ororo, take me too. Logan pulled a cigar from somewhere, clenched it between his teeth, and lit it amid the flames of war. That kid Fenris has been annoyed with me for so long. After this, I bet he'll remember me for the rest of his life. Hiss, ha ha ha. Damn, that's good. For the last cigar of his life, Logan took a deep pull, and drew the smoke straight into his lungs. After a light cough, he suddenly shuddered and even rolled his eyes involuntarily. Seeing Fenris draw closer and closer, Logan casually tossed away the cigar, and his gaze instinctively drifted into the distance. There lay a powerful body that had already been trampled flat. Sabretooth. During the chaos of the battle, when Logan passed by that spot, that brief glimpse had pieced together fragments of memories in his mind, memories of the time he had spent with that older brother. From the Civil War to World War I to World War II. They were not clear, but they were enough to leave a deep impression. Even you didn't make it. Wonder how I'll do. Brother. Countless broken fragments of memory surged into his mind. At this moment, Logan finally laughed easily. There was no fear in his eyes, only release. I'm coming. Aurora's eyes soon turned white, and a fierce wind gradually rose beneath everyone's feet. At the same time, in the air. They're telling me to leave. Fenris clearly noticed the countless worried gazes turned toward him from the crowd below. Urgent cries rang in his ears. In the next moment, Fenris saw Wolverine and Colossus slowly rising into the air under Aurora's support. Their flying speed grew faster and faster, and then they lunged without hesitation toward the swarm of sentinels behind him. Professor Fenris, run! Kid, live and avenge us! Fenris was extremely fast. He soon swept past the defensive line below, and headed toward the outer edge of the island. At the same time, Logan and Colossus shot past beneath him at high speed, then firmly blocked the space behind Fenris. Logan's deliberately carefree voice entered his ears. This scene had come so suddenly that the expression on Fenris's face instantly froze. Fenris, live well. A thick optic blast shot up from below with powerful force. In the next moment, Fenris saw Scott gathering the last of his strength, and rushing swiftly in the exact opposite direction from him. Fenris saw a brilliant smile suddenly appear on the man's face. Take care of Jean. In the final moment, his lips moved, and he murmured those words. As soon as he finished speaking, Scott turned and ran without hesitation. Very soon, a portion of the Sentinels really was drawn away from the main force by him. Have you all lost your minds? Fenris realized almost instantly what the people below were trying to do. With the little strength they had left, even if every last one of them threw their lives away, what use would it be? Do I, someone who treasures his life this much, need you to save me with yours? What are you showing off for? Could you at least discuss it with me before you go off to die? Fenris had originally planned to lure these sentinels outside the island. He had never expected such a change to happen. Kid, don't get lost the next time you drive. Watching Logan roll his eyes in disdain while blocking the space behind him, and recalling the worried and complicated gazes the others had turned toward him, Fenris could not help sighing. His entire body immediately broke out of high-speed flight. From absolute motion to absolute stillness, it took only an instant. You want to be heroes? Try again in your next life. All of you, get back here. Fenris quickly turned around and reached out without hesitation toward Logan and Colossus, who were about to fly into the army of Sentinels. But the Sentinel robots did not care who came first or second. As long as they were mutants, they were prey. Those towering killing machines swarmed forward like locusts. In an instant, they spread their long claws and swallowed all three of them beneath a sky-covering tide. Watching Fenris abandon the chance they had bought for him with their lives, Storm's eyes below instantly turned bloodshot. Azazel, go save him. Mystique suddenly turned her gaze toward Azazel. She clutched the edge of his clothes tightly and roared, Fenris can't die. If Fenris dies, everything is over. Azazel did not hesitate at all. After flinging off Raven's hand, his entire body immediately turned into a cloud of red mist and vanished from where he stood. However, in the next instant, he appeared again in a sorry state, as if he had been struck hard. There's a very powerful magnetic field around Fenris, and it's still expanding. Azazel closed his eyes in near despair. I can't get close to him at all. Despair spread through the crowd in an instant. Time itself seemed to freeze at that moment. Everyone instinctively closed their eyes, unable to keep watching the scene that seemed destined to stain the sky with blood. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 128, 128161 words. It's over. Time seemed to freeze in that instant. Yet in the next moment, a world-shaking roar suddenly exploded from the clouds. The thunderous sound wave carried an unfamiliar pressure as it rolled out in every direction. The sudden change made everyone instinctively raise their heads and look into the sky. Under countless eyes, the wings of light behind Fenris directly scattered into motes of light that filled the air. Dense black radiance abruptly began expanding, completely enveloping his entire body. Wherever the black light passed, Fenris's body began swelling at a visible, frenzied speed. 5 meters. 10 meters. 20 meters. 30 meters. It felt as though a century had passed, yet also as though only a blink had gone by. The rainbow light covering his entire body faded away, and the tall young man disappeared from the air. In his place stood a terrifying giant beast a full 40 meters tall. That enormous body brought with it a suffocating pressure. Watching a human body swell nearly 20-fold in a short span of time was an unprecedented visual shock, and everyone below could not help widening their eyes in horror. The battlefield fell dead silent. Only the faint, nearly inaudible sound of someone swallowing could be heard. The X-Man who had just been desperately trying to buy Fenris time to escape, the Brotherhood's leaders such as Mystique, and even the elderly, weak, sick, and injured being protected at the deepest part of the battle line. Everyone seemed frozen in place. In unison, they raised their heads and stared at the colossal figure that had suddenly appeared not far away. Unlike Godzilla or Mothra, giant beasts completely outside the scope of human understanding, this beast's form was not unfamiliar to anyone. At first glance, it was simply an enlarged Kong. But unlike an ordinary Kong, Fenris's body was tall and upright, and his proportions appeared even more balanced and powerfully built. Every muscle on his body bulged high, filled with an explosive, terrifying strength. Deep eyes were set within a majestic, masculine face. With just a single glance, a fierce, domineering kingly presence rushed toward everyone like a physical force. God, Fenris has to be almost 50 meters tall now, right? That violates the law of conservation of energy. Does physics just not exist anymore? Beast Hank, who had studied science his entire life, felt his worldview being shattered again and again by Fenris. As ordinary people, they were like children before the Sentinel robots. In the truest sense, even if they jumped, they could not touch the Sentinel's knees. Only by relying on the weapons Fenris had brought back from Wakanda did they possess any power to contend with them. And yet those terrifying steel giants now seemed like infants before Fenris, their height barely reaching a quarter of his. Under such an exaggerated size difference, the savage and horrifying appearances of the Sentinels filling the sky completely lost their intimidation. Even their clawing, menacing postures suddenly looked oddly clumsy and harmless. As expected of Professor Fenris. He even looks handsome after turning into Kong. Those young X-Men now wished they could glue their eyes to Fenris, staring straight at him without blinking. No wonder that kid dared tell me to leave everything to him. In the distance, Magneto sensed the magnetic field around Fenris erupt in an instant. Fenris's entire aura climbed at terrifying speed. After seeing that mountain-like new form he had never witnessed before, the blank look on Magneto's face flashed by and vanished. Once he understood everything, he immediately burst into wild laughter. Bolivar, you've hidden in the dark and schemed for decades, but I doubt you could ever have calculated Fenris into your plans. The heavens have not abandoned mutant kind. This time, you've lost. Thoroughly and completely. Ha 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 ha. Arrogant and gratified laughter rang out. Magneto's face was filled with undisguised pride. As if echoing his wild joy, wherever Magneto passed, the magnetic field erupted, lightning flashed, and thunder roared. In the distance, the small mountain like Kong had silenced the entire battlefield the instant he appeared. At this moment, Fenris was the unquestioned sole focus between heaven and earth. Near or far, everyone's eyes were gathered on him. Ororo, do you think we just ruined Fenris's plan? Because the Sentinels pursuing him had suddenly changed targets without warning and flown toward Fenris again, Scott, who had originally resolved himself to die, circled around and returned to their battle line. Looking at Fenris in the sky, who was now fully releasing his domineering aura, and at the ever-growing number of Sentinels flying toward him, Scott panted lightly and nudged Ororo beside him. They had been too eager to save him. They thought Fenris was trapped in danger, which was why they had chosen to act regardless of the cost. But no one could have imagined that Fenris, despite his honest-looking face, had still been hiding a trump card like this from them. Be more confident. We definitely ruined Fenris's plan. He probably meant to pull the battlefield outside the island. Fenris was like a true shot of adrenaline. At this moment, Ororo finally could not help letting out a breath of relief. After fighting beside him for so long, Fenris had never disappointed them in battle. Now that he had chosen to reveal this trump card, it meant this war had completely entered its final stage. Next, just as before, every difficulty would be solved in front of Fenris. Come on, Fenris. This time, we're relying on you alone again. A faint sigh left Storm's lips, barely audible. Her gaze followed that overwhelmingly domineering figure in the sky without reservation. When she thought back to the first time they had met Fenris, for a moment, her heart was filled with complicated feelings. Feeling the dull, powerful heartbeat coming from his own chest, Fenris only had to slightly clench his fist to sense the terrifying strength hidden within this body. It was completely different from the experience of becoming Godzilla. He had an innate familiarity with this form. He did not need to adapt at all before he could easily unleash 200% of its power. Suspended in the air, Fenris suddenly raised his head, and saw the countless sentinel robots in the sky swarming downward without the slightest hesitation or pause. These killing machines did not understand unnecessary thought. They had been born only for battle, and the only things their eyes could see were mutants. Between Fenris and the overwhelming tide of sentinels were Logan and Colossus, lifted by the gale and blocking the space behind Fenris, ready to trade their lives for his. As the sentinels surged in like locusts, just as the two men's bodies were about to be completely swallowed and easily torn to shreds. Get back here. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 129, 129. 1954 words. Fenris thrust his hand out wildly. His enormous palm, carrying a violent current of air, struck after the fact but arrived first. Before Logan and Colossus could react at all, he shielded them in his hand one step ahead of the sentinels. In the next moment, an intense sensation of weightlessness arrived. Only then did Fenris's massive body crash down onto the ground under the pull of gravity, letting out an earth-shaking impact. The instant he landed, a powerful shock wave burst outward in every direction, and several fierce gales rose from nowhere across the island. In the sky, the formation of the sentinel swarms was thrown into chaos by that force. Seeing this, Storm quickly flew forward and blocked the front of the crowd, finally dispersing the incoming gale. Heavy footsteps rang out. Taking advantage of the brief gap while the sentinels in the air were knocked back, Fenris strode forward in 2 quick steps and arrived before the defensive line below, in front of Storm and the others. This defensive line relied on a mid-sized mountain hollow. The special terrain made it easy to defend and difficult to attack, while also allowing it to shelter quite a few civilians. Outside the hollow, dozens of sentinels were constantly launching assaults against the line, only to be forced back again, and again by the combined efforts of everyone inside. Sensing the footsteps behind them, and as these sentinels detected an unprecedentedly powerful mutant presence, a small mountain-like shadow already loomed over them in the next instant. Through shared information, they turned around almost without hesitation. At the same time, huge flames instantly erupted from their bodies. As the scorching heat sprayed out, these sentinels actually leaped up against Fenris, who was several times larger than they were, and attacked with precision toward the weak points across his body. "You're in the way." To the X-Men, these sentinels were steel giants. But in Fenris's eyes, these sentinels, which were only about as tall as his knees, were nothing more than slightly refined toys. Facing their counterattack, Fenris did not even raise an eyelid. He merely lifted his right fist high, then smashed it down. Terrifying force erupted in an instant, pouring directly into the sentinel robots' bodies. Under that tremendous power, these flaming steel giants did not even manage the slightest resistance. Their supposedly indestructible shells exploded with a crash, leaving fragments scattered across the ground. Only a few breaths passed from beginning to end. The killing machines that could easily force the X-Men into a desperate situation were completely destroyed, and the entire process did not even stir the slightest ripple. "He's too strong. He just smashed them all." Even though everyone had already expected something like this, the strength Fenris displayed now, the absolute power that crushed everything, and the effortless calm with which he wielded it still made everyone click their tongues inwardly. With the crisis resolved, Fenris's enormous body slowly lowered, almost blocking their entire field of vision. Even though they knew he meant them no harm, the people below still could not help retreating several steps. Fenris's casual breathing sounded like thunder in their ears. There were even a few timid people whose whole bodies immediately went stiff from fright. Their eyes rolled back, and they fainted on the spot. The others were not much better. If they could barely adapt to the 10-meter sentinel robots, then Fenris, who could easily crush the former, was a dimensional-level existence before them. The pressure brought by this difference in the essence of life would only grow more obvious as time passed. Fenris keenly noticed the confusion and fear in those people's eyes, but after sweeping his gaze over them, he did not care at all. As Fenris opened his palm, Logan and Colossus finally saw the light again. These two men, publicly recognized as iron-willed tough guys in the academy, looked as though they had suffered some enormous shock. Trembling, they supported each other as they jumped down from Fenris's palm. Only after standing on solid ground again did the two of them let out a breath of relief. They had experienced several brushes with death in a short span of time, especially the despair of being clenched in Fenris's fist while he smashed sentinels. Logan swore he never wanted to experience that a second time in his life. "Fenris, I was trying to save you, and you used it as an excuse to settle a private grudge." Logan collapsed onto the ground, panting heavily. Looking at Fenris's brand new form, for some reason, he felt no surprise whatsoever. This kid's a freak. Normal enough. Hearing Logan still mocking him even now, Fenris immediately could not help rolling his eyes. After tilting his head and thinking for a moment, Fenris suddenly stretched out his right hand before Logan could react. He bent a finger and flicked him, sending him flying straight out. Wolverine bounced high off the ground, then fell back down heavily. Seeing the deep helplessness and indignation on the other man's face, Fenris finally looked satisfied and cheerfully let it go. "Fenris." In the crowd, Scott stepped forward and raised his head, staring directly up at Fenris, who was half-crouched. "Don't worry. Leave the rest to me." Without the restriction of his ruby quartz glasses, Fenris could clearly see the hope hidden deep in Scott's eyes. Just now, everyone had been ready to risk everything and trade their lives for his, sacrificing the entire X-Men team to secure his safety. There was no doubt that Scott, as captain, had given that order. Scott had followed Professor X for decades, and watched the X-Men reach their current point step by step. Fenris knew better than anyone how difficult that decision must have been for Scott. But he had done it anyway. A group of people with no blood relation to him had been willing to calmly walk to their deaths for his sake. At least in that moment, Fenris admitted that he had indeed been moved. "We're counting on you, Fenris." After saying those last words, Scott, who had long since exhausted himself, finally collapsed completely onto the ground. At this point, including all the X-Men, everyone within this defensive line had completely lost the ability to fight. Not far away in the air, the dark mass of Sentinels had already finished regrouping. This steel army made entirely of killing machines was flying toward this place at extreme speed. At this moment, their eyes were a crimson more intense than ever before, burning with naked killing intent. Thousands of Sentinel robots had gathered. Nearly 70% of the main force Bolivar had deployed this time. When they formed ranks, the droning sound created by their flight carried a terrifying wave of noise that made one's scalp go numb, resounding over the island. Fenris. If this army swept across the area, it would be enough to devour any enemy completely. Fenris was certainly strong, but could he really stop them? Looking at that terrifying scene, then at Fenris's towering body slowly rising and turning to stand firmly in front of everyone, many people still felt uneasy. But at this moment, they could only place all their hope in Fenris. If Fenris won, they would live. If Fenris lost, they would die without question. Come on, then. Let's see which is harder, your scrap metal or my axe. The Steel Legion swept in with overwhelming momentum, and Fenris's expression grew colder bit by bit. At this moment, his back was perfectly straight. After taking a quick step forward, Fenris almost completely shielded the mountain hollow behind him with his body. Before he fell, not a single sentinel would cross this line. At the same time, in the distant Antarctic base. Inside the spacious command room, a robot with a huge screen for a head sat properly at the very center. On the screen, Bolivar's large-headed dwarf-like image was displayed. But at this moment, his face was livid as he stared at the footage coming from the front line. Looking at the giant Kong that had appeared from nowhere, the atmosphere in the command room plunged to freezing point. They had originally believed this would be a decisive victory for them. They had not expected so many variables to appear one after another in less than half a day. They had blocked the Brotherhood's channels for contacting the outside world, and they had even prepared a specific countermeasure against Azazel. Yet these mutants had still managed to send word out by some unknown method. When the X-Men appeared, they had not panicked. They were the world's top researchers, and they had absolute confidence in their own creations. They knew that even if the X-Men came, they would not be able to make any waves. Victory would still belong to them. This carefully planned surprise attack was still supposed to end in an unprecedented triumph, and the mutants on the island would all be slaughtered with overwhelming force. But Fenris's appearance made Bolivar truly panic for the first time. One man restraining this many sentinels was fine. After all, restraint and combat were two different concepts. But where had this 40-meter-plus Kong come from? Hadn't the previous intelligence said he could only transform into a monster less than 10 meters tall? Their carefully designed new generation sentinels just happened to hold the advantage in size. This sudden change had almost instantly reduced all their preparations against Fenris to nothing. Bolivar, now in digital life form, slammed his palm heavily onto the table. The speaker on the screen also precisely simulated an appropriately timed sound, transmitting his anger outward. The command room fell silent at once. Kill him. Kill him for me. Bolivar stared unblinkingly at the front line and said viciously, enough ants can bite an elephant to death. He wants to fight 1,000 alone. He wants to play hero. However, under everyone's gaze, just as the masks of the front row sentinels opened and their laser beams finished charging, the Kong on the screen seemed completely unaware of the coming attack. Fenris slowly extended his right hand. Not far away, the giant axe embedded in the ground suddenly began trembling slightly, as though it had received a summons. A long, resonant hum carried a shrill sound of cutting through the air that reached into the clouds. In the next moment, the silver-white battle axe shot violently into the sky, then traced a graceful arc through the air as it flew toward Fenris. However, the dense Sentinel Legion just so happened to be blocking the space between Fenris and the battle axe. Suddenly, Fenris saw the axe seem to pause for an instant. In the next moment, the giant axe began spinning at high speed without warning. The crimson light on its handle burned with unmatched heat, while the axe head lit with a faint blue glow. As the battle axe spun, red and blue rapidly intertwined, transforming into a magnificent two-colored streak of light in the air. The battle axe abruptly became an afterimage. Without dodging or swerving, it pierced cleanly through the entire Sentinel Legion. Violent explosions rang out. Countless pieces of Sentinel wreckage rained down from the sky. Amid the sound of shattering metal, with only one simple cleaving thrust, the once dense Sentinel battle formation had been forcibly torn open, leaving a huge gap. A muffled impact sounded as the spinning battle axe crashed into Fenris's open palm. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 130, 1301398 words 1-2. God, Fenris took out at least dozens of sentinels with that one swing. At last, the steel giants that had once seemed powerful enough to drive everyone into despair shed their first blood. Countless chunks of metal rained down from the sky. Some fragments even carried such powerful kinetic force that they nearly smashed down right in front of Scott and the others. Almost everyone at the academy had seen Fenris constantly playing with that delicate little axe in his hand, but only now did the battle axe Logan had once mocked as a toy finally reveal its true brilliance before their eyes. When such a divine weapon was enlarged to a scale of 30 meters, all the superpowered traits Bolivar and his team of top scientists had bestowed upon the Sentinel robots lost all meaning. Frost, flames, lava, diamond, and even steel. All those forms, powers that could easily crush any mutant on a dimensional level, looked so frail and useless now. Wherever the edge passed, their indestructible shells were sliced open, leaving clean, even cuts. The Sentinel Legion was massive enough to thoroughly plow through the island. This was a Sentinel Legion that had consumed decades of effort from Bolivar's research team. Yet when they faced an enemy that surpassed them in both size and power from every angle, even their vast numbers were reduced to a meaningless figure. The rampaging giant beast raised his indestructible battle axe. Every time its sharp, cold edge swept across the sky and reflected a graceful arc of warm sunlight, countless costly steel giants fell with it. For a time, the entire island became a stage for Fenris to unleash his power to his heart's content. On the ground, more and more Sentinel robots abandoned their original targets and joined the battle to encircle Fenris all at once. However, no matter how numerous the Sentinels were, there was still a limit. Before the overwhelming encirclement pressing in from every direction, the massive Kong moved with shocking agility. At this moment, Fenris seemed to have no concept of conserving strength. Every swing of his axe carried the full force of his body. His wild movements had no technique to speak of, yet they were more effective than any refined technique. Completely unreasonable strength was, at this moment, the most convincing logic of all. As Sentinel robots fell from the sky like raindrops, the dark clouds that had once covered everyone's heads gradually dispersed. Sunlight spilled down bit by bit. After suffering through a near-catastrophic ordeal, this surprise attack meticulously planned by Bolivar was finally extinguished in full. A huge metal head suddenly came flying from the sky and smashed heavily to the ground in front of Mystique, Scott, and the others. Looking at that head, which was much larger than any of them, then at Fenris's back 100 meters away as he guarded the line alone, they watched the dense swarm of sentinels in the sky grow fewer and fewer. Not a single one could cross Fenris and harm them in the slightest. At this moment, there was no fear in anyone's heart. There was no worry either. In their place was an unprecedented sense of security. With Fenris here, no problem is truly a problem. Storm's words kept echoing in everyone's ears. In the past, Fenris had already proven the authority of that seemingly impossible statement again and again. Even enemies that seemed almost unbeatable to them, and obstacles that seemed impossible to cross, could always be resolved with ease before that man. Invincible. Fenris-sensei is invincible. Every time Fenris swung his axe, it triggered a thunderous cheer from below. The young X-Men looked at their teacher, who was usually refined and gentle, now transformed into a titan beast, casually toying with powerful enemies they could do nothing against. A sense of pride, as though they shared in his honor, surged into their hearts. Kitty Pryde, Rogue, Colossus, even Iceman, who usually liked to act mature, could not help dropping his restraint and cheering wildly. The more miserable they had been under the Sentinels just now, the more satisfying it felt now that payback had come. As time passed, even the Brotherhood civilians could not help joining in and calling him teacher, cheering at the top of their lungs. For a time, the cries of Fenris-sensei rang out across the area. Meanwhile, elsewhere. Raven, Emma, what do you think about us joining Xavier's school? Azazel, who had been constantly maneuvering around and rescuing people since the beginning of the battle, finally collapsed weakly onto the ground. At this moment, there was only that invincible back in the distance reflected in his eyes. He had experienced Apocalypse's dynasty. He had experienced countless upheavals across the world. But today's crisis was the only time that even the mere memory of it could make him feel fear from the bottom of his heart. Across his thousands of years of life, the current Azazel suddenly realized that finding a reliable man, no, a reliable powerhouse to lean on did not seem like anything shameful. This place is completely unlivable now. The Brotherhood headquarters is gone. I feel like there's nothing bad about joining Fenris. Listening to Azazel chatter on, Raven and Emma looked at each other. Neither of them could hold back, and both burst into laughter. With the crisis resolved, their faces finally showed a long-lost ease. The war is over. Emma clutched her severed leg and finally let out a groan, collapsing onto the ground with no trace of dignity left. At this point, as long as Fenris was here, Bolivar and his sentinel robots could no longer stir up any waves. Mutants were safe. In the air, after a near-slaughter-like sweep, the sentinels that had once gathered densely enough to blot out the sky were reduced to only a few stragglers. They formed scattered little squads, yet still stubbornly resisted. Facing the last sentinels, the battle axe in Fenris's hand suddenly erupted with blue light. In the next moment, a dazzling axe light burst forth, accurately covering all the remaining sentinels within its range. After leaving the battle axe, the sharp blue light instantly expanded against the wind. In the blink of an eye, it had grown to 100 meters wide. A series of faint, brittle cracking sounds rang out. The axe light passed through the remaining sentinels without the slightest obstruction, then rushed straight out of the island and lightly sank into the distant horizon over the sea. For a time, 100-meter-high wave surged upward. Countless sprays of water churned and rolled, only gradually calming after a long while. That's a wrap. Outside the island, among the transport aircraft formations responsible for delivering the Sentinel robots. Through their precision optical equipment, everyone in those crews had clearly taken in everything happening on the island. They had watched the mutants fall into decline. They had watched the mutants receive reinforcements. They had watched the mutants fall into despair once more. Then, in the end, they had watched the mutants win a complete victory. The dramatic reversal far exceeded these people's expectations. They had watched helplessly as those nearly invincible sentinels were completely wiped out by a godlike titan that had appeared from nowhere. For a time, the communication channel was completely silent. A wave is coming. Do remember to dodge, all right. When the dazzling axe light flared and stirred up a 100-meter wave rushing toward the aircraft crews, an elderly male voice with a hint of teasing suddenly rang out through everyone's communicators. Oh, all right. Thanks for the reminder. All units, pull up. At the captain's order, every aircraft immediately climbed in response, avoiding the incoming wave. Wait, that's not right. Command is far away. Who was reminding us? Finally, someone noticed something strange. Yet at that exact moment, the aircraft control systems suddenly began blaring frantic warnings. As chills ran down everyone's backs and they turned their gazes outside the cabin, they saw that directly ahead of the formation, a thin figure wearing a helmet was standing in midair, smiling at them with a friendly expression. Don't be afraid. It's me, your good friend Magneto. End of chapter. Get +30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem, every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 131, 131142. For words, did they think magnetic torsion devices would make any difference? How naive. Magneto gave a contemptuous snort and raised his hand lightly. The next moment, countless aircraft that had surrounded the island so tightly that not even water could seep through began bursting with fine electric sparks across their fuselages. One after another, the entire fleet went dead. Violent explosions rang out in succession. A moment later, the aircraft dropped into the sea like dumplings falling into a pot, splashing down one after another. That brat Fenris made this mess, and he does not even know to clean it up himself. Watching the enormous waves Fenris had stirred up continue surging toward the island without losing momentum, Magneto shook his head with a smile. Then he swiftly flew into the air above the island and faced the towering wall of water head-on. He raised both hands again and pressed them heavily downward. In an instant the waves, which had been carrying an overwhelming force, seemed to be pulled by something. The foaming white crests trembled sharply, then crashed back down toward the sea with a thunderous roar. Within a few short breaths, the tsunami that could have easily swallowed the entire island was effortlessly erased. At the same time, on the island, once all the sentinels had been completely destroyed, the people who had long since been scared out of their wits finally began crawling out from their hiding places. After surviving a disaster, they watched sunlight spill down from the sky once more. Across the vast island, crowds were running everywhere. As they stepped back onto this once peaceful, harmonious land and saw its present state of devastation, countless people burst into tears. Others wept from sheer joy. They vented their emotions madly against the sentinel wreckage scattered across the ground, torn between sorrow and elation. Heavy footsteps sounded. After annihilating every sentinel, Fenris slung his battle axe directly over his shoulder. Standing on high ground, Fenris took the entire island into view. He had been here before. Back then, this place had been like a paradise beyond the world. Now, under this scene of ruin, not a trace remained of its former glory. This world is not the one I know. Unknown changes are happening every moment. Although the catastrophe had been stopped, the damage done to this land could never truly be repaired. Strength. Fenris could not help letting out a quiet sigh. Professor Fenris. The next moment, under Fenris's surprised gaze, everyone on the island began gathering toward him at once. They had been scattered across different places, but all of them had seen Fenris slaughter his enemies in every direction. They knew that the Titan before them was one of their own, a mutant. Without Fenris, even if they had hidden deep underground, they would still have been dug out by the sentinels and exterminated. As word spread from person to person, the cries of Professor Fenris soon resounded through the clouds. Before long, the place where Fenris stood was surrounded by a dense, packed crowd. Countless people raised their heads, gazing up at the godlike Titan who had pulled them out of despair. Fenris looked down and saw pairs of shining eyes, along with cheers loud enough to shake the heavens. How does it feel, being adored by thousands? After dispersing the tsunami, Magneto had appeared at Fenris's side at some unknown point. Just a little hard to get used to. Fenris grinned. The magnetic field around him clearly transmitted his will outward. You will get used to it. Magneto turned his head and looked seriously at Fenris's imposing face. You are the future of mutant kind. Everyone loves you. Everyone reveres you. In the end, you will have to grow used to shouldering this heavy responsibility. Then that can wait until later. Fenris lowered his head and glanced at the crowd below. Everyone was cheering, but only some were grateful to him from the bottom of their hearts. Among the rest, some feared him, some refused to accept him, and some even hated him deep down. All the faces of humanity were there. With his keen perception, Fenris saw all of it clearly. He smiled indifferently, and his body abruptly shrank. In an instant, the towering Titan who had weighed on everyone's hearts so heavily that they could barely breathe vanished into thin air. The shadow cast by the Titan disappeared. Sunlight spilled down once more, finally giving the mortals who had been craning their necks a chance to breathe freely. Fenris simply disappeared, leaving only sentinel wreckage scattered all over the ground. That kid. Magneto shook his head helplessly. In his view, Fenris was still too young. Now, our homeland has been destroyed. At this most critical moment. Under Magneto's organization, the restless crowd soon became orderly again. In the distance, the X-Men were gathered together, quietly watching Fenris stand at the center of the crowd as he accepted their admiration and reverence. After the Titan vanished, Logan, who was leaning against a tree stump and contentedly smoking a cigar, did not seem surprised. He merely let out a soft laugh. "What are you laughing at?" A familiar voice sounded from beside him. "I'm laughing at you running away with your tail between your legs." Logan's ear twitched, but he did not even turn his head as he teased him. "Why run so fast? What, afraid everyone was going to eat you alive?" "Not really. It is just that Magneto wants to create a god of mutant kind, but I think mutants do not actually need a god. A god only needs to appear at the most critical moment and save the world. He should not become someone who answers every request." Fenris had appeared beside Logan at some point. He looked calmly at the bustling crowd in the distance. "I have my own things to do. I do not have time to be a mascot." "You brat." Logan casually tossed his cigar aside, turned his head, and looked at Fenris's young face with a smile. "Welcome back, Professor Fenris." Scott, Aurora, Mystique, even Emma and Azazel, all looked over at the same time, smiling. "Treatment comes first. I'll take everyone back to the academy. Xavier's school, treatment room." "Fenris, are you sure my leg can still be saved?" With Mystique supporting her, Emma lay down on a hospital bed and looked at Fenris with eyes full of hope. She had loved beauty her entire life. Now she was missing a leg. Although it would not affect her abilities, it had still left a knot in her heart. "Most likely. Do not worry." Fenris comforted her. "Fenris, you wanted to see me." A short while later, an elegant voice rang out. The next moment, Connors's thin figure slipped in through the doorway. "Connors, please take a look at Emma's leg. Is there any way to restore it?" Fenris stepped aside. "Oh, what a beautiful young lady." Connors disinfected both his hands. After lifting the covering cloth, the look he gave Emma immediately turned sympathetic. "It can be done, but there will be some side effects. Can you accept that?" A moment later, Connors nodded with considerable confidence, indicating that he could treat her. "My leg can grow back." Emma's eyes instantly lit up. "Of course. It is just that after being injected with the lizard serum, you may turn into a giant green lizard person." Connors turned around. After rummaging around for a while, he took out a clear, transparent serum. "Of course, if you are willing to hang around Fenris whenever you have nothing better to do, the way I do, then even more miraculous changes may occur." "What do you mean?" Emma blinked, not quite understanding the implication behind Connors's words. A strange look suddenly appeared on Connors's face. The next moment, under Emma's shocked gaze, his body also began to swell. Soon, a lizardman over 3 meters tall appeared out of thin air. His skin, however, was not green, but rough and black. Countless soft dorsal spines stretched upward from the tip of Connors's tail. They did not look sharp at all. As they swayed, they even looked somewhat adorable. Emma's gaze flickered back and forth between Connors and Fenris. Why did Connors look somewhat similar to Fenris in this form? End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 132, 1321199 words. Miss Emma, I know I look a little ugly like this, but my strength is far beyond what it used to be. Connors shifted back into human form, and proudly introduced his lizard serum. After the improvements, the serum no longer causes people to lose their minds. If I take this serum, can I gain the same kind of power as Fenris? Emma lay on the bed, her gaze flicking swiftly between Connors and Fenris. I trust you. Faced with the temptation of overwhelming strength, Emma hesitated for only an instant before gritting her teeth and extending her arm. Thinking about what was about to happen next, even the usually composed Connors raised the corner of his mouth. Beaming, he lifted the syringe in his hand. Sleep well. Emma felt an icy liquid being injected into her body. After overusing her powers on the battlefield, she had already been utterly exhausted. All she sensed was wave after wave of drowsiness washing through her mind. Soon, her head tilted to the side, and she fell into a deep sleep. This is the true path of evolution. Connors put away the needle, fully satisfied. Whenever he recalled the terrifying scene of Fenris breaking his spine with a single punch, when they first met, Connors still did not know how many nightmares he had suffered afterward. The towering titan beast he had seen in that hallucination had clung to him like a nightmare every moment since. Until one day, Connors was shocked to discover that he, too, had begun showing signs of evolving toward Fenris. In that instant, all his anxiety and fear vanished like smoke. What nightmare? What inner demon? That was the path Connors had walked to reach this point. It was the stairway by which he would advance toward Fenris. From that day onward, Connors began trying every possible method to get closer to Fenris. He built his own little nest not far from the building Tony Stark had constructed for Fenris, began collecting footage of Fenris's battles, and became deeply fascinated by the overwhelming, invincible force Fenris displayed in combat. From the bottom of his heart, he longed to become that kind of existence one day. But the closer he got, the more Connors realized how powerful Fenris truly was. Before he had only thought Fenris was a mutant so powerful that Connors could only look up to him. Now, however, he felt that looking at Fenris was truly like a mayfly gazing upon the vast blue sky. Impossible to pursue. Impossible to fully comprehend. There is still a long road ahead. Connors shook his head, and was just about to turn and leave, when a slightly trembling hand suddenly grabbed his arm. Do you still have more of that serum? I want to give my brother a shot too. Logan's eyes were bloodshot, but his gaze was fixed firmly on Sabretooth not far away. After Victor had been torn completely in half by the Sentinels, his lower body had long since been trampled into pulp. Even his upper body was now a mangled mass of flesh and blood. His chest and back had nearly been crushed flat against each other. His eyes were wide open, dull and lifeless. When Fenris led everyone away from the battlefield, Logan had insisted on bringing him back. Fenris, however, had sensed a faint trace of life in Sabretooth's body, which was why Sabretooth had been sent to the treatment room. Unfortunately, every instrument's test results told them clearly that Sabretooth's consciousness had already completely dissipated. The faint trace of life Fenris had sensed was only the remaining healing factor in his body still struggling. Just as Logan gave up his last shred of hope, Dr. Connors's words ignited one final spark inside him. Please, Dr. Logan tugged at Connors's sleeve almost pleadingly. What if, all right. Connors leaned in and examined Victor's condition. Years of experience told him this man no longer had any need for rescue. But Logan's heartbroken eyes still made him waver. Soon, Connors took an extremely murky green serum out of his laboratory. This is my latest result. It can grant the subject an extraordinary healing ability. Even a shattered heart can heal again. But the side effects are extremely severe. It may very well cause a berserk state and memory loss. I cannot guarantee it will bring your brother back. Everything depends on his own fate. With a low sigh, Connors gently pushed the serum into Sabretooth's body. For a while, even Fenris, who had been watching the other X-Men receive treatment nearby, could not help coming over. Together with Logan, he waited silently for a miracle to happen. 1 minute. 10 minutes. 1 hour. As time passed second by second, just as everyone had already turned their heads away in disappointment, and even Connors could not help putting away the syringe and preparing to leave, a faint light suddenly returned to Sabretooth's vacant eyes. Logan noticed that abnormality immediately. He sprang up, rushed to Victor's side, and grasped his hand. Soon, several more hours passed. Suddenly, without warning, a faint sound of airflow came from inside Victor's chest. The sun rose and the moon fell. Just as Logan was beginning to doze off, a nearly inaudible call suddenly reached his ear. Several days later. Inside a lecture hall of nearly 1,000 square meters at Xavier's school. Fenris played with an arc reactor in his left hand, one that Tony had upgraded. Inside his body, the atomic furnace was refining the divine power he had seized from Bast, the Black Panther god. As he felt the endless stream of energy cheering and surging through him, he looked almost comfortable, if not for the fact that he was sitting in a classroom. On the podium, 8 enormous blackboards had already been filled with dense formulas and derivations. A tall bald figure was clinging to a ladder several meters high, climbing up and down as he worked across the blackboards. Chalk dust drifted down in clouds, and from time to time, large drops of sweat fell as well. His busy appearance formed a sharp contrast with Fenris's relaxed posture. "Old friend, after all this time, you still have not cracked that man's coordinates. Is the title of the world's most powerful mind a little undeserved?" A rich, forceful voice came from the entrance to the classroom. Fenris only felt his vision blur before Magneto had already pushed open the door, walked over to him, and sat down at his side. "Soon, Eric." Professor X answered casually without turning his head. His eyes never left the blackboard for even a moment. "Instead of staying on your island and overseeing the reconstruction, what are you doing here?" "Before I send that bastard Bolivar to hell for good, I made time to take a trip to Sokovia." Facing his old friend's question, Magneto suddenly sighed. "There I found 2 children with tremendous potential for you." End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 133, 1331208 words. If even Magneto called them promising, then those 2 children's talents had to be exceptional. For a moment, even Emma, the White Queen seated beside Fenris, instinctively tilted her head and looked toward Magneto. After being injected with the lizard serum and spending several days recuperating, Emma's leg had slowly grown back. The fair, delicate skin looked no different from her original long leg. That morning, after learning that Professor X had messaged Fenris to say the coordinates would soon be deciphered and asked Fenris to come find him in the classroom, Emma had been idle with nothing else to do. Under the grand excuse of needing to move her body, she had followed Fenris all the way here. Magneto raised an eyebrow in surprise, then glanced at Fenris, who was sitting leisurely on his left and yawning. "Why are you here?" "My leg still has not fully recovered. I can only rest for a few more days." Emma shrugged and spread her hands as if utterly helpless. "You know me. I have always been in poor health. Is your injury not healed yet, or do you simply not want to leave the academy?" Magneto gave Emma a deep look. "Who knows?" Emma gave a soft hum and lay comfortably across the desk, the corner of her eye constantly sweeping over the person beside her. "What kind of children are they, Eric? Did you bring them here?" On the other side, Professor X jumped down from the nearly 5-meter ladder with a thump. He turned and walked toward Magneto as he asked, "Where are they now?" "Right outside the door, Charles." When these 2 children were mentioned, Magneto still felt a considerable headache. Strictly speaking, this was all his fault for being too indulgent when he was young. Now, after destroying Bolivar's Sokovia base, he had accidentally dug up an old mess of his from who knew how many years ago. On top of that, he did not feel at ease leaving both children with the Brotherhood. Xavier's school, where Fenris and Charles were both present, had naturally become his best option for the moment. "Eric, you..." Charles's gaze drifted lightly across his old friend's face, and in the blink of an eye, he understood everything. After sighing in exasperation, as though disappointed in a hopeless student, he called directly toward the door, "Children, come in." "Hello, Professor. I'm Wanda Maximoff." "Hello, Professor. I'm Wanda's older brother Pietro Maximoff." A young man's and a young woman's voices sounded one after another from the doorway. The next moment, two young people who looked around the same age as Fenris slowly walked into the classroom. After politely greeting him, the siblings looked with curiosity at this mutant giant whose name stood alongside their father's. As one of the most widely known leaders of mutant kind, Professor X's reputation was something Wanda and Pietro had heard of long ago. Now that they were meeting him face to face for the first time, Charles's gentle response finally eased a little of the tension in their hearts. "Wanda, didn't the rumors say Professor X was crippled?" Standing behind his sister, Pietro muttered quietly to Wanda, "How come he not only isn't in a wheelchair, but also looks so much younger than he does in the photos?" "Shut up, Pietro. That is incredibly rude." Wanda shot a fierce glare at her unreliable brother, then turned back and gave Professor X an apologetic smile. "It is all right." Charles shook his head unconcernedly. In his eyes, they were even a little younger than Fenris, nothing more than children who still did not understand the world. "Charles, these two children are both extremely gifted. But because they grew up in a small country all this time, they lack experience, and they do not know how to control their own powers." Magneto's voice sounded at just the right time, carrying a clear note of helplessness. "It took me a great deal of effort to persuade the children's mother and bring the whole family here. I hope you can help me teach them properly." "All right. I will arrange living quarters for the children's mother and for both of them." Professor X gently withdrew his gaze from the two children and nodded, agreeing to Magneto's request. "Does that mean I can meet the legendary X-Men?" After receiving Professor X's affirmative answer, excitement suddenly flashed across Pietro's face. For a moment, he was so happy that he jumped straight up from where he stood. "Cyclops, Storm, and Beast. They are all at the school, right?" Ever since Magneto had found him and told him about his origins, Pietro, who was restless by nature, had long since been unable to hold back his urge to meet the superheroes from those stories. Professor X only felt a gust of wind brush past him. Pietro's figure instantly turned into an afterimage and vanished from where he stood. For a time, the enormous classroom was filled with the sound of wind stirred up by his excited sprinting. Seeing his son acting so impulsively, Magneto, who was seated in his chair, immediately furrowed his brows deeply. After barking his name, he suddenly reached out, and an invisible force instantly enveloped the entire classroom. A startled cry rang out. The next moment, Pietro's figure appeared again, his entire body floating in midair as Magneto dragged him up like a kitten. The chaotic commotion finally settled down. "You should properly learn what basic manners are, child." Hearing her father lecturing her brother, Wanda sighed speechlessly, only then finally having the time to look around the classroom. In the last few rows, several young men and women were quietly gathered together, doing their own things as if no one else were present. Although they were all young, and some of them were even carrying quite a few injuries, their presence was sharp and fierce. They looked like warriors who had survived many battlefields. "They are all so strong." Wanda keenly sensed a faint feeling of danger from these people. She did not dare look at them for too long, and gently moved her gaze away. Further forward, to her father's left, sat a young man about her age. The young man had handsome features. Beneath his seemingly gentle appearance, however, Wanda sensed a deeply hidden aura of danger. Gentle, yet violent. Calm, yet dangerous. A beautiful woman with an elegant air and pale skin was lying quietly on the desk, her eyes fixed unblinkingly on the young man beside her. The young man, however, completely ignored that heated stare, as though all his attention had already been placed on the glowing object in his palm. What a strange person. For some reason, Wanda always felt as though there was an inexplicable attraction around the young man, drawing her gaze toward him unconsciously. "Hello, Wanda." As if noticing her gaze, Wanda saw the young man raise his eyes slightly toward her and reveal a gentle smile. My name is Fenris. I'm a teacher at the academy. Hello, Professor Fenris. Wanda blinked lightly. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 134, 134. 1255 words. Impossible. If this Fenris is really as powerful as you all say, then how could he have stayed quietly at the academy all this time without making a name for himself? If I had that kind of strength, I would have built a reputation for myself long ago. A voice of doubt suddenly rang out across the broad lawn of Xavier's school. Pietro shot to his feet, his scrutinizing gaze sweeping across the faces of the young X-Men around him. I don't believe it. You're definitely exaggerating. I don't need to prove anything. It's perfectly normal that an ordinary person like you can't understand the way a peerless monster like Fenris thinks. Iceman casually picked up a drink beside him, chilled it, then sipped it at leisure. Maybe he just doesn't like showing off the way you do. During this period, every surge in Fenris's strength had been witnessed by everyone at the academy. From the beginning, when he could still barely be considered within the realm of a normal person, his strength had shot upward like a rocket until it reached its current level. By now, he had long since left everyone else far behind. After saving the X-Men from danger countless times, these young people around his age had long since been thoroughly convinced. I still don't believe it. Then go test him yourself some other day. Won't you believe it then? The others did not try to persuade him. They merely whispered among themselves and watched Pietro with interest, as if he were a newborn calf unafraid of a tiger. After downing an iced drink, the calm after battle felt especially precious. Miss Wanda, since you've just arrived, you may not know much about the academy yet. I can serve as your guide and give you a proper introduction to our school. Pyro coughed lightly, the corner of his eye naturally drifting toward the clear, gentle face not far away. Ever since Magneto had driven them out of the classroom, his gaze had not left Wanda once. However, after he spoke, Wanda did not respond for a long while. Instead, her clear eyes still swept from time to time toward the classroom. Seeing this, Pyro's eyes shifted. Actually, to be honest with you, I'm the one among these people who is closest to Professor Fenris. I know everything about him. Sure enough, as soon as he said that, Wanda's lively eyes turned at once, clearly reflecting a curiosity that was about to spill out. Can you tell me in detail? This mysterious and powerful Professor Fenris of yours seems to be around the same age as us. Why does everyone call him Professor? Although he had successfully struck up a conversation with the new girl, for some reason, Pyro suddenly felt his eyelids twitching over and over. After a dry cough, he said, "It's like this. Fenris, what are you thinking about?" Inside the classroom, Charles was lying against the blackboard and calculating desperately. Below the podium, Fenris's eyes were unfocused and hollow, and from time to time, he quietly muttered words that others could not understand. Magneto's gaze swept over his face several times. Seeing that Fenris showed no reaction, he finally could not help lowering his voice and asking, "If there's a problem, say it. Everyone can help you solve it together." After knowing him for so long, Magneto had never seen Fenris so distracted. As he comforted him, Magneto lightly took out a brand new photograph from inside his coat. In the photo, countless members of the Brotherhood were carving something into a massive stone several dozen meters tall. From its outline, it was clearly Fenris's likeness. It was no exaggeration to say that Fenris's current status within the Brotherhood was no lower than Magneto's. In fact, it had even faintly surpassed his by a small margin. "You're quite popular with them now, kid. It's nothing serious. The Brotherhood will always be your backing too." Magneto cheerfully patted Fenris on the shoulder. He felt no displeasure over such a thing at all. In fact, he was very happy to see Fenris rise. The higher Fenris's prestige, the happier Magneto became. Deep down, he even very much hoped that Fenris could surpass him. "I was thinking about the chaos inside Wanda's body." Fenris had only spoken halfway when he suddenly felt the kind, gentle aura beside him shift. A chill instantly surged into his heart. Misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding. Fenris shrank his neck and gave an awkward smile. Oh, really? I brought my daughter here just a moment ago, and now you're all ready. Magneto slapped the photograph onto the desk with a smack. His eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Well now, Eric, this just got lively, didn't it? A cloud of red mist appeared behind the two of them. Azazel stood with his arms folded, a teasing smile hanging on his crimson face. It's over. Emma and Victor are sticking to Fenris every step of the way, and now even your daughter's been targeted by him. The tip of his tail swayed lazily as he happily poked his boss's shoulder and laughed at his misfortune. You're in trouble. Azazel, shut up. Emma leaned against Fenris as if it were the most natural thing in the world, laughing so hard she could barely contain herself as she watched the two men glare at each other. The coordinate information has been decrypted. Professor X's voice suddenly rang out, finally calming the chaotic group. He looked at the noisy scene in front of him, and rolled his eyes helplessly. You're all major figures in your own right. Why are you still acting like children? Magneto glared fiercely at Fenris, then abruptly swept his coat aside and stood up in a huff. Charles, give me the location. I'm going to wipe out that old bastard Bolivar for good. Do I have to go with you too? Anyone else can stay behind, but not you, kid. All of you are useless. This is the result of decades of our work. Underground, in the Antarctic base. The command room was dead silent. Only an angry male voice echoed endlessly through the space. On the enormous central control screen, the footage clearly showed Fenris in his King Kong form, wielding a giant axe as he slaughtered the killing machines, the product of this group of top scientists and countless taxpayer dollars, as easily as chopping melons and vegetables. Sentinel wreckage fell to the ground like rain. Quite a few researchers closed their eyes, unable to bear watching any longer. Trask, this accident was something no one wanted to see. Someone shook his head and sighed in a low voice. It was not that they were incompetent. Everyone in the base had already done everything they could possibly do. It was simply that no matter how they calculated, they had never been able to account for an outlier like Fenris appearing among the mutants. No one had expected that the Sentinel robots, on which everyone had placed such high hopes, would fall into that monster's hands during an operation that the supercomputing center had simulated tens of thousands of times, with every result ending in a decisive victory. I can't accept this. After a long while, Trask's low voice sounded. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.